we're going to talk to you today about the role of the careers leader, and this is a role that's developed in English schools, but we think's got implications for other countries as well. David and I we wrote a book a few years ago. We've just done the second edition of it. It's called the Careers Leader Handbook, and it's a very practical guide for people who are in schools about how to deliver a very good careers education and guidance program, and also how to think about their role a little bit differently. And that's really what we're going to talk about, I think, primarily today. So we're going to provide some insights today on the current model of career guidance in English schools. We're going to introduce this role of the careers leader, which I think you might find interesting. And we're going to discuss the implications of this role for other systems. And very happy to take some questions. I don't think we're not going to probably fill the whole hour, so we've probably got time at the end for some questions. I've just seen a couple of questions come into the chat. Let's check. It's not people screaming and saying it's not. The microphone of the main hall is mute. Can anybody help with this? So, is there a technician here? So yeah, can people hear now? Is that working? They're saying there's no sound.
Does that mean we're supposed to use that one there?
Do we need to use this microphone? Would this be better? Hello? If we try this, is that any help? Okay, we're just waiting to sort this out.
It's fixed now.
Is it fixed? Can somebody online confirm that you can hear us? Yes, there we go. Right, great. Well, it's good to have you in here as well. So, great. Okay, so let's start with some definitions here. So, career guidance. We've been talking about it all day, but what do we mean by it? Is interventions to support young people to progress successfully through education and training and into work. And we think it benefits both individuals, helping individuals to progress, but also society by enabling the education and training system to work effectively and the labour market to work effectively. So when we're thinking about career guidance for young people, we recognise that there are quite a few things going on. So we have the provision of information, we have career counselling, we have careers education, and then also this sort of actually actively helping people to move into post-secondary destinations, and employment as well. So as a career counsellor, you're doing all of these things. An effective careers programme is probably doing all of these things. So if we look internationally, we can see this organised in quite a few different ways. And there's really two sort of prominent models. The first one is what we might call a guidance counsellor model. And my understanding is that's what you have in the Czech Republic. But it's a system where you have somebody who's responsible for the school, who's responsible for supporting young people's career decisions, helping them to do some career learning, but also probably other things as well. They've probably got a wider pastoral role, supporting, perhaps helping to ensure that students have good welfare, helping to deal with any problems, so any students who have a crisis. This guidance counsellor is going to be doing quite a few of these kinds of things. So that's one model. Careers is inside the school. It's done by somebody who's a specialist member of staff, but who probably has responsibilities that are wider than just career education and guidance. And then we have another model, which is we would call an external careers model. You'd probably find that in countries like Germany. And you would see that as being an external service, perhaps the public employment service, comes into the school. They've got good employer links. They're specialists on career and on employment. And they will work with the school as an outside body to help the school. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both of these systems. The first system, the guidance counsellor system, the guidance counsellor will know the children very well. They'll have really good relationships in the school. They'll understand the staff and so on. In the second model, the external careers service will have good links with the labour market, will have good careers information. And so there's advantages and disadvantages to both of these. And one of the things you might want to think about is what's the system that you're working in. Now, in England, we used to have something that we called the partnership approach. So where these responsibilities were divided. So the school did some things and the external careers service did other things. But what's happened is we've had a period of reform, we had a lot of cuts, and the balance has shifted. So in recent years, what's happened is the schools in England have got a lot more responsibility. We've sort of lost our external careers service, but there wasn't somebody in the school, like a guidance counsellor, to do all of that work. So it was very problematic. So we started to build on some older roles that were in existence in the school, and we said, we want to think about this slightly differently. It's not just a guidance counsellor. We want someone who's a careers specialist, but we want them to be what we've called a careers leader. So we're going to talk to you a bit about that model, and I think it might, whichever system you live in, there's probably some learning that might be useful from this. So I've kind of covered this. So we've got this sort of internal models where we have within schools we might now have internal models where we have as well as the careers leader, we also will have a careers advisor who will do the career counselling. And then we have external models where we still have a careers leader in the school, but they're bringing in, sometimes paying for and bringing in external careers advisors to work with their service. So more like the external model. So we've ended up in this slightly weird position in England where we've, I started out by saying countries tend to have one or other of these models, the guidance counsellor model or the external careers model. Well, if you went across England, you could find a variation on that in different schools. So we've got, in terms of the personnel working in a school, we've got somebody who's a careers leader. We'll say a bit more about them in a second, but they're not necessarily doing the career counselling. But what they are is they're the school's lead person who's responsible for careers. They've got some authority in the school. We talk about them as being a middle or senior leader in the school. So they're hopefully an important person in the school. But what are they actually doing? Well, what they're doing is delivering something called the Gatsby Benchmarks. So this came out of some research that I was involved in quite a long, almost 10 years ago now. And we went and looked at systems in different countries. We looked at literature. We talked to various careers practitioners and so on. And we said, could we sum up what effective provision in schools is? And we had a go at it. And this is what we came up with. We call it the Gatsby Benchmarks. And it's really the framework for careers provision in schools in England. So I'll just quickly run through this, but you can find out a lot more. There's a lot online about this, but I think it's a very good framework. I'm not saying you should adopt it completely, but it gives you a really good starting point. So what does it say? Well, first thing, your school has to have a careers program, not just occasional guidance interviews, not just an event that happens once in a while, but a program. You have to think about it as a program. And it starts right when students go to school, and it goes right through the school. And not only that, you need to write it down. Students need to understand it. Staff need to understand it. But you also communicate it on your website to employers, to post-secondary learning providers. So if somebody wants to look at your school and say, what kind of careers provision does your school have, they can see it and find it out. And of course, you also want to tell the kids about it as well. So they need to understand what's out there. So we have this stable careers program. It should be stable from year to year. Of course, you should reflect on it. You should evaluate it. You should improve it. But you shouldn't just do something once and then do something completely different next year. It should be the idea that you have a series of activities, a curriculum and so on that takes you through. Second thing is, One of the really unique things about careers in contrast to other forms of counselling is we have a knowledge base which is about labour and learning market information. We need to know what's happening in the world and be able to communicate that to young people. So we need to have a good base of information that our programme is based on. So we need to know what jobs there are in our area, where, you know, how things, what qualifications you need for different things and so on. We also want to address the needs of each student. We want to recognise all students are different. They probably need slightly different things. One of the ways we can figure that out is by actually keeping good records on students. Have they been on work experience? Have they had a careers interview and so on? But we also want to recognise diversity within the student body and target initiatives to different people because they've got different issues. We then want to make sure that young people have many opportunities throughout the time they're at school to meet with people from outside of school. So we're normally going to do that by bringing employers in. And when we say employers, it also employees as well. Working people, we want to bring them into the school. We want to have them talk about their career. We want to have them talk about working in their organisation. And we want to give the kids a chance to ask questions about that. Now, there's other ways we can do that. We can do mentoring. We can do all sorts of things. But the important thing is that as a child going through school, you should have lots of opportunities to meet people who aren't teachers. And that's one of our benchmarks. The next one is that you should sometimes actually leave the school and go and have some experiences of the workplace. You might go and visit a workplace, see what it looks like, see what it smells like, see what people are talking about. You might actually go and do perhaps a week or so in a workplace and do some actual work. What would it be like if I was a hairdresser? What would it be like? What would my days be like? Well, if I go and do it for a week, I get a sense of that. So our sixth one is experiences the workplace. And then the seventh one is basically the same thing again for learning. We want students to get out. We want them to experience vocational learning that's beyond the school. We want them to experience higher education. We want every kid to have gone and seen a university at some point, because we know some kids have never seen a university. Their parents didn't go to university. We think at some point during their schooling, they should get out of the school, go and see one. Or at the very least, we should have some students coming in, talking about what it's like. And that's important for both the vocational route and the academic route. And then finally, we have what Gatsby calls personal guidance. I think I would call it career counselling, but that one-to-one thing. We need to, when we say by the time somebody leaves school at the age of 18, they probably should have seen a career counsellor at least twice. And that should be for every student. So we've got this framework, and it's been very, very effective because schools often told us that they were doing good careers provision, and when we looked at what they were doing, we couldn't really see what it was they were doing. It was giving some people access to some careers interviews, a bit of work experience here and there. So now we've made it very clear. If someone says, what does a good careers programme look like? What should I be doing? We say, it looks like this. Here you go. There's 8 things. If you do all 8 of them, these are minimum standards. You can do it better, of course. You can give people more work experience. You can give them more chances to speak to a careers practitioner. Some students are really going to need that. But as a bare minimum, this is what everyone should get. And we've communicated this for a long while to all schools, and we're starting to get to the point where schools are really doing this, because change in schools takes a long while. And one of the other things that we found is that change in schools is also very dependent on the school leadership. And so having a very simple and a very clear message about what good looks like has been really helpful in getting the school leaderships to buy into this. So, I was doing here, wasn't I? Yeah. So we've got, so we've actually embedded this effectively into the law now. So we've had a law for quite a while which says schools should provide career guidance, but it's pretty vague. What does it really mean? So we've now got a set of detailed regulations and guidance that have come out. We had something which was called the Careers Strategy, which the government produced, which said, this is how we're going to implement these Gatsby benchmarks. And we've started to really build it in to the regulations that sit around schools. Now, there are some strengths and weaknesses to the benchmarks. They're very strong on what to put in place. They present good practice in a way that can be easily understood by policymakers and by school leaders. But they're quite weak on intended outcomes. They don't really say why you're doing this stuff. All that stuff I just described to you, it's all like things to do with kids, but it doesn't say why. What are you trying to achieve from this? And that's something that we've worked on subsequently. And it also, there are some limitations with it that if David and I were writing it, we would probably change a number of the things. We're currently going to be working with the Gatsby Foundation to try and redevelop it at some point. So we've got some strengths and weaknesses here, but what we think we have got overall is the basic idea of having simplicity and clarity about what a careers program in a school should look like, and then working for a long period of time and not changing it a lot has been very, very useful to us. So we then got involved in developing, because we recognise this problem about it doesn't got very good outcomes, we said we need some kind of curriculum, we need some kind of intended learning outcomes that give us an idea of what you're trying to achieve. So we know what you're doing work experience, you're doing some careers education in the curriculum, you're doing various other things that Gatsby tells you to do. Why are you doing it? Well, we want to develop these 6 competencies with careers, with young people. And so, again, I won't go through this in detail. In a sense, all of you will probably have your own things like this. And in a way, the most important thing is to have do some thinking about what you want students to get out of it at the end. So what do we say in England? We say, well, if you've had a good careers program and you've learned what you should learn, then at the end of your careers education, you will understand that throughout your life, you're going to need to keep learning. You're going to grow throughout life. You're going to need to keep learning and developing. You're going to understand that you're going to need to research things and look out into the world and understand what opportunities are out there. You're going to actively have to manage your career. You're probably going to have to change jobs. You're probably going to have to argue with your boss about how much he pays you. You're going to have to take this on as active career management. You're going to need to be able to create opportunities. That might even be setting up your own business. But it's certainly going to be creating opportunities within your organisation. And it's not all just about work, is it? It's also, and somebody who's effective in their career is not just really good at work, they're also good at balancing their life and their work. So this work-life balance idea. So we say that's one of the things you should learn when you're doing a careers program at school. And then finally, we think there's a huge amount of connections between the big picture. We've talked about the war in Ukraine. We've talked about COVID. These things matter, and they matter for individuals and their careers. We get something big that happens in politics or in technology or in the environment, and it changes the opportunities that you have. And we need to help people to understand that. And one of the great things about that is it gives us huge opportunities for cross-curricular links, because we can think about, when we're talking about careers with people, how does that link with the history curriculum? How does it link with the geography curriculum and so on? So this is our framework. So what I've tried to do here is to explain the sort of system that we have in place in English schools. And then I'm going to hand over to David to talk in a bit more depth about this careers leader role.
Okay, thanks, Tristram. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here. I'm going to talk specifically about this leadership role that is now necessary to make this work. So in summary, what you've got from that first input is that where we are now in England is we have a school-based model. But it hasn't grown out of a guidance counsellor model. It's grown out of a removal of the partnership approach. So we've got to a position where we're not dissimilar from the situation that occurs in a lot of other countries, but we got there through a different route. And what you might take from this bit as I go through when I describe what the careers leader role is and what we're doing to support and implement that, is you might think, well, how is that transferable to our context where the sorts of things that we're talking about that a careers leader might do are the sorts of things that a guidance counsellor would do in addition to individual guidance counselling. So I'm going to look at the leadership and management arrangements of it. But it's quite clear that there are two distinct but complementary professional roles here. There is the role of leading the program in the school, and there is the role of providing individual guidance to young people. Now, I'll quickly say that could be done by the same person. Brackets, as long as they understand they've got two jobs, the person who's given them the jobs understands they've got two jobs, and the person who's given them the jobs gives them the resources to do two jobs. Or they could be two different people. One person into the school, the careers leader, the other person possibly employed by the school as a careers advisor, guidance counsellor, or maybe brought in from outside. So that's the position. But in order to make that work, whatever approach you've got, and whatever variation there is, it's only going to work if there is a careers leader, somebody to pull all of this together and make it happen. So that's why, in the earlier slide, as part of the government strategy, there is now a requirement. A lot of this is expectations, but there is a requirement on all schools to have a careers leader. And, well, as I come to at the end, we have at long last got a nationally funded programme of training for that role, something that I've been lobbying for many years. So, what does this careers leader do? So, stating the obvious, they're responsible for leading and managing the programme in the school. And we separate out 4 tasks. And Tristram and I helped write the government guidance on what this leadership role is. There is a leadership role, and there is a management role. And in English language, often those terms get interchanged, leader and manager. But they are different. A leader is somebody who comes up with the vision, comes up with the plan, and leads the implementation of that plan. The manager is the person that makes sure it still all happens. And there's both functions. We're wanting somebody who's positioned in the school that they can lead the program, but also take overall management of it. And they're not going to be able to do that unless they talk to almost every member of staff in the school who's going to be involved in one way or another in contributing to the provision of career education and guidance for young people. So there's all that internal, we use the term coordination for that. But as Tristram said, when you go through the benchmarks, so we've got very clear expectations of what should happen in a programme. Some of those are making sure that young people have encounters, opportunities to meet employers, providers of higher education, providers of further education, providers of apprenticeships. So there's a whole load of networking tasks that form part of this role as well. It is a busy role. And I'll just flick through these slides without going through in great detail. But those are the sorts of functions that we mean by leading the team. So the leader is somebody, for example, if you look at the second one there, advises the senior leadership, the principal or head teacher of the school on what we should be doing. It's at that level. It's not just making sure it happens, it's actually presenting the strategy and the plan to the senior leaders and taking oversight of it. Keeping it under review, number 4. Making sure that we comply with the legal arrangements and requirements on the school. Then there's the set of management tasks, which are making sure that all of these things, once we've had the plan and we start to implement it, actually happen. The coordination functions, if we're going to make sure that young people have got access to information, careers education, you'll see in the third point down, we have a subject on our school curriculum called personal, social and health education, which is often where schools put their careers education programme. So it's working with those teachers to make sure there is a careers education programme. But something else, and I'll come back to the implications of this in a minute, one of the benchmarks is encouraging all areas of the school curriculum, all subjects, to make links between what they're doing in the subject and what happens out there in the world of careers. So it's the careers leader will be working with the leaders of those subjects to make sure that when English lessons are taught, when science lessons are taught, when art lessons are taught, we're making links with not just what the career opportunities are, but how the things that they're learning in those subjects have applications in the wider world. And there's all these links with external providers through networking, with universities, with colleges, with apprenticeship providers, with employers. So a busy role. And when the government required schools to have the role, it was only fair that we presented to head teachers and principals a specification of what that role might be, so that they could choose to appoint the right person who could fulfill those roles and responsibilities. So that's the role, that's what a careers leader does. How does a school organise them? It's up to a school. We have quite a lot of autonomy now in the way our secondary schools run, and it's up to them to decide where to place this person in the structure, but we have two models that are the most common model. Either it's somebody that we call a middle leader, so they're not on the senior leadership team of the school, but they're the next level, like we might call it a head of department, a head of a faculty, there'd be one for each subject area. The careers leader would be somebody at that level. But they have got a clear line of communication to one of the senior leaders who is their support on the senior leadership team, who helps them implement this plan. Or they could be a senior leader themselves. The problem with that model is senior leaders have got many other jobs to do, and so does careers get the attention? So sometimes what our schools are doing is they put a senior leader in charge to begin with, who develops the program, but then develops a middle leader who can take on the day-to-day leadership of it over time whilst they get on with the next issue that needs sorting out in the school. Now, I just said earlier that these two roles could be separate roles, separate people, but it could be one person. So we've got some schools where there is a careers leader and what we call a careers advisor, but more commonly across Europe is known as a guidance counsellor. They're two separate people. And that guidance counsellor, as I repeat, could be a member of staff at the school or could be somebody who's brought in from outside. But we've got a growing number of schools where those roles are combined. So one person does both jobs, leads the program and does the individual guidance. But you don't need me to tell you they're two very time-consuming roles. So my point earlier was that's fine, that can work. Nobody says it won't work that way as long as people realise they've got two jobs and need to be resourced and supported to do two jobs. They're not one and the same job. So who are these people? Well, they come now from a range of professional backgrounds. In our old partnership model, when we had careers teachers, heads of career departments, they largely were teachers. The way we used to find, I was one of these way back in time, the way we found a careers leader for a school was find a busy teacher and give them another job. Now we've got people who come in from a range of backgrounds. Some are teachers. Some are guidance counsellors who've moved into these careers leadership roles. Some have come from other sectors of the economy. Some are human resource managers. People who come from different sectors into this role. But in terms of what we can pass on to you as lessons that we have learnt from all of this, what do you need to make it work? Anybody can be this as long as some of these conditions that are in the bold type on this slide apply. So have they got the authority to do the job, to lead a program, rather than just administer it? So are they a senior leader or do they have right links to a senior leader? Are they in the right position in the school management structures? I suspect it's not different in your countries. Nobody in our schools wants to go to more meetings, but you want to make sure that you're in the right meetings to have the right conversations with the right people. Tristram and I ran a workshop in London on Monday before we came out here with a group of careers leaders, 33 of them in the room. The one issue they presented more than anything else in terms of a challenge that they had, and they were all enthusiastic people, really committed to doing their job, but the one issue they found really challenging was, have I got enough time to do the job? Because a lot of those things that were on the 4 slides that I went through, the roles and responsibilities, you cannot put in a briefcase and take home and do in the evenings. So have I got enough time to do the job? And lastly, but it's because it's my particular area of interest and work, is do they know what they're doing? Because I've yet to meet a young person in a school who says, when I grow up, I want to be a careers leader. They all come from other professional backgrounds and then they become careers leaders. So they need training for that role, access to professional development. And it's the theme of your conference here for the day. is competence and the training for those competencies. And so access to expertise and training has been a really important part of all of this. And that's where we have now this nationally funded programme that I talked about. The Careers and Enterprise Company is the name of our government agency in England, and we need to be very clear, we are only talking about England here. It's different in the other UK countries. In England, there is a Careers and Enterprise Company which basically administers and manages the government-funded projects. And a really important part of this project is a national programme of training for careers leaders. It's not compulsory. They don't say you must have training, but they do say we'll make it available and you don't have to pay for it because we'll cover all the funds. And it's at 3 levels. There's an introductory module that all careers leaders can do online. It takes about 2 to 4 hours just to introduce you to what this role is and what it is you've taken on. And actually, any of you could access that through that URL because it's open to anybody and your colleagues. Then there is the main bulk of the programme, which is a fully funded training course. We've commissioned 7 different providers to provide that. Some are universities, some are career sector training organisations that provide that training course. We've got a distance learning package for those who find it difficult to attend at a particular time, whether it's face-to-face or online or hybrid. We deliberately started these courses as face-to-face, pre-COVID. They all had to go online and be remote during COVID, but they took place at a particular point in time. You had to log in at that time. There's been a partial return to face-to-face, but both the tutors and the careers leaders themselves seem to prefer, in the main, to stay online or have a hybrid approach. But there are some people who find it still difficult to attend online at a particular time, but quite happy with what we would call a distance learning package, an open learning package, where you proceed through the programme at your own pace, at your own time. So there is a distance learning option that's there as well. And on completion of this, the school gets some money to cover the costs that there might have been involved in all of that, and they don't have to give the money back. So if there weren't all these costs, because it was all done online and they didn't have to travel anywhere or anything and not needed to be released from their teaching, then they can use the money to help implement their programme. And then we've got a 3rd level, which says, right, once you've done your training course, how do you stay in touch with other careers leaders and share experiences and ideas and practice? We have this national network of careers hubs where schools are put together in geographical groups and where they can meet and activities are laid on to provide that opportunity to share practice. So in conclusion, that's where we are, that's where we've been, that's the journey we're still on, 10 years after our external service was closed down. We started to implement this. There's clear expectations of what's required in terms of inputs, that's the benchmarks. Clear expectations of what's required as outcomes, that's the CDI framework. And we've got a national programme of training for this crucial role of careers leader. What have we learnt? Well, we've learnt, 1, if you're going to embed it as a school-based model, you've got to have clear leadership. It's got to have strong policy resource support from government. We'd like a bit more funding. There are these 2 roles. They can be focused in one individual, but there's got to be a clear understanding that these are 2 roles. We've said, and I think it's been a theme of some of the workshops, has been about professionalisation. We've got to professionalise this role, but somebody may not be a careers leader and that's all they do. They're combining it with being a teacher, they might be combining it with another role in the school. So we've got to think about how do we professionalise it without saying that's your sole professional. And then the last point, and it's particular interest of mine, as I've said, you've got to provide training for the role. We can't just say, here's the job, get on with it. It's not over, because we've now got another major implication of this, and I was talking to one of the earlier speakers over lunch about this, is that you can have your highly trained careers leader, but the person they speak to inside the school, the subject teacher, the tutor, the mentor, has also got to understand why they're coming to talk to them about getting involved in the careers programme. So our next challenge as a nation is how do we introduce into the training of all teachers an element of careers so that they understand why it is that the careers leader is coming to talk to them about how they can contribute to this programme. Our government has made a statement that it's going to introduce careers into training, all training for teachers, but it's yet to happen. So, Tristram, are you coming back to us, Tristram? So, that's as much as we can tell you about where we are and how we got there and what we think the next set of challenges are. As I said, it might apply to your situation, but just in a slightly different context. Have you got any questions of us or points that you'd like to make?
Sorry. Yeah, oh, sorry, there we go. Yeah, I was just going to just check. There's one comment that we haven't addressed in the chat, which just says hello everyone. So that's all right. I think we're all right. So
say hello.
Hello back. Good. Are there any questions either from anyone online or in the room would like to ask about this role, or would anybody like to give us a reflection about how this might be relevant? Hi, great. Let me give you the microphone.
Thanks. My question relates to the last task you mentioned. That what's your task or role for the future? Yeah, what would you like to concentrate on? And from my experience, if I look on the Gatsby Benchmarks, I think they're really lacking the first bit of the CDI framework, which is about getting to know yourself, your potential, self-reflection, and I think this should be an important part of career guidance and counseling, because it's just not about getting to know about the world of work, but also like what are my competencies and what I would like to do in the future in relation to my competencies, yeah. And I think that from my experience, the schools which have a strong program focused on this self-reflection are really successful in let's say, especially the primary schools, that the kids then are kind of more sure when they're choosing their future career path, because they are more certain of their skills and they know what to do and how to decide. My question is, do you sometimes use the competence portfolio as a tool which might help this process, and which is something that you can start to develop it when you enter the school, and it just follows you through the whole of education, because there are always gaps, you know, if you have one teacher which is great and then just supports the self-reflection, and then you move to the higher grade and then suddenly everything's lost. So how
great.
do you achieve this, the continuancy, and
yeah.
you work with career portfolios?
Yes, thank you. All right, so I'll just say a little bit about the CDI framework, and then David will pick up this question about where we want the careers leadership to go next. So CDI framework, absolutely, as you say, it's quite holistic. So it's, you know, traditionally careers work was really about think about yourself, think about the labour market, think about how you put those together and make your first decisions. I think we've tried to broaden it out and say, yes, all of that's important. You have to think about yourself, and part of that is thinking about your relationships with others, with your family, and so on. Part of that's about thinking about your relationships with society. But then we're saying, actually, you're thinking about that across the life course. It's not just making your first decision. It's also managing your career, considering, you know, whether you want to set up your own business or a social enterprise. So it's about yourself, but it's about your values. And then, of course, it's about learning quite a lot about the world outside. And the really tricky stuff is how do you put that together? And I think you're right that these reflective portfolios are a very powerful way to do that. But gosh, they're difficult to implement. They really are. And I think we would have to say that we had a very big government agenda which was trying to implement this across schools, and it failed, to be honest. And it failed for exactly the reasons that you've said. Well, and I'll add another one as well, which is firstly, the teachers didn't all understand it, so you got very patchy implementation. But secondly, students were sold the idea that this has to be something which employers will be asking for. And nobody really told the employers about it. So when they would take it out, students would go out with this folder to show, and now it would be an website or whatever. Employers don't necessarily understand that. And so I think portfolio-based learning can be powerful. It has a number of different functions. One is about reflection and developing your learning and keeping track of your learning. Another one is about how you communicate that to the world. I'm not absolutely convinced that the same tool does the same things, but yeah, so I think we can see a huge potential in that, but we definitely haven't really got it to work. But yeah, so do you want to say something about careers leadership?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly, getting on the careers education, we said one of the weaknesses of the benchmarks was there's not enough explicit about it. And if we were to write the benchmarks and the government policy, we would put more in there about careers education and the self-knowledge bit of it. Yes, I agree with you that it ought to start in primary schools, and we do have some projects that are doing some work in the primary sector, but we could do a lot more in all of that. All the strategy talked about was what happens at secondary level, so it's age in our system from 11 onwards. How do I see the role developing? What we're seeing happening is, well, there's two things really. One is still questioning in some schools, have we got the right person in place to do this? Or is the school seeing this really just as a routine sort of admin task rather than something that needs some proper strategic leadership? So there's a question about, in some schools, is it still a coordination admin function rather than a leadership function? But the other is actually, I think we're seeing more of these combined roles of careers leader and careers advisor or guidance counsellor in one and the same person, rather than buying in somebody from an external service. Now, there'll be some of you sitting here, maybe many of you here sitting here, said, well, actually what you've described is what we've got as good guidance counsellors, because they don't just do individual guidance, they do all this other stuff you're saying a careers leader does. You've got there just through a different route, and I think that's probably right. I'm sure there's a lot of guidance counsellors doing a lot of other activities inside the school. We're just emphasising the really importance of having that careers leadership role. But I do see, I think in 10 years' time, there'll be more of what I call this hybrid model of a combined careers advisor come careers counsellor. As long as, I keep repeating myself, don't I, that it's understood this is two big jobs, not just one.
There's another question which has come in online, which is basically saying what the strengths and the weaknesses, and what do we envy from other countries. And I mean, I'll have a go, and perhaps David will have something to add to it. But one thing I think we've come and talked all about England here, and we should be very clear that neither of us think that careers education and guidance in England is perfect, nor do we think it is the best in the world. But I would say the strength for me is that we have now assembled quite a good model. The weakness is that it's not fully implemented across all schools, and there's not enough funding to do it. And to be true, and so one of the things when we've been asked by government what's wrong with the policy, actually nothing's really wrong with the policy. Of course, you'd make tweaks, but basically what's wrong with the policy is that you haven't funded it well enough to actually happen. And if I look to other countries that have been much more willing to put in funding behind this and make sure that these things, the system that they have actually is implemented in all schools. And so I've just been doing case studies. There's a lot of work going on in Canada. There's a lot of work going on in Iceland. There's lots of different systems that we would draw from. The Gatsby Benchmarks was first and foremost an exercise in stealing the best of what we found elsewhere in the world. And this careers leader role, one of the places that we drew some influence from was the Netherlands, where they have got a role that's a bit like this, that's been established for a number of years. So it's absolutely not perfect in England. There's many things wrong with it, and most of what we do well, we've stolen from somewhere else, but hopefully not everything. But yeah, that would be my answer to that. I don't know whether you add anything to that.
No, there's one aspect to your question I didn't answer, and you had it in part, which is about the portfolio thing, which I see great value in portfolios and using for self-reflection. In the early days of the Careers and Enterprise Company, it was given a project to try and develop a national portfolio. And that's the bit that broke down and didn't work. And that's partly because we have a culture now amongst our schools of autonomy. They develop their own materials, and They have requirements, but it's up to them how they meet them. And if you try and then develop a national portfolio, you end up with what we call the lowest common denominator. To please everybody, it becomes so basic, it's not really much use. Everybody wants to develop their own tool.
Great. All right, Dorian, we'll take one more, and then we've got to finish, I think. So, yes, just...
Yes, I come from Malta, and we have a very similar role. We call it the principal career advisor. One of the challenges that they tell me that they face is really coordinating the work of all people involved within the schools who teach career education. So we have, for example, career education within a particular subject. We have teachers who also, within their subject, teach career-related topics. We have the guidance counselors, too, who work on career guidance and counseling. And we have also the leaders, the headmasters, and who have their own programs. So one of the challenges they face is how they find it difficult to coordinate the work of all stakeholders involved, and let alone then involving employers and parents. And it's not an easy job. And sometimes there is... we lack the coordination, that everybody knows what the other person is doing, and there may be some overlap. And practically, there isn't the time for all the stakeholders to meet, discuss, and to know what you are doing, what I am doing, and to provide a coordinated program to the students.
Very good question. I'm not sure we can answer it in a minute. David, do you want to have a go?
Well, only in as much as I said, the group we work with on Monday, just a further illustration of the point you're making. The biggest challenge is finding the time. And part of it we were trying to suggest to them is, I mean, I've yet to find anybody who says they've got enough time for their job anyway. But it's careers leaders who say it. But you think, right, so if I've only been given a limited amount of time to do my job as a careers leader, at least make sure that I can use that time for leading careers and not tie me down with all sorts of routine organisation and admin jobs that need to be done around it. So maybe if I could develop a member of the support staff in the school to relieve me of some of all these routine contacts and other tasks, so that those limited time I've got, I can focus on careers leadership. That might be a way forward. There is no easy solution, because if there was, somebody would have implemented it. But I think effective role of administrative staff to support the careers leader is a way forward.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for people for staying and asking so many interesting questions. We've got a few copies of the Careers Leader Handbook. If you would like to buy one from us for... we say our Black Friday price of £25. So let us know, or you can get them on Amazon or on the publisher's website. So and it's a very, as I say, a practical handbook that's talking about all this stuff that we've been talking about today. But thanks for inviting us. We've been having a great time here and really learnt a lot. So we will finish there. Thank you.